Well, hello everyone. I am Scott Ferguson. I'm going to read to you today Mark Twain, a name that in American letters and literature speaks for itself, I think, basically. This is from 1864. It is a nonfiction piece. I think we could still call it a story very safely, but it is nonfiction. I'm really thinking about doing a little mini series here on the subject of sleep. It is a subject with which we as humans have mixed feelings and mixed relations, I dare say. This is called Early Rising as Regards Excursions to the Cliff House. Yes, from 1864, there's no mention whatsoever of the raging Civil War going on. I assume that's in large part because Mark Twain is in the San Francisco Bay Area at this time and probably feeling physically as well as perhaps emotionally removed from the subject, at least for a short while. Okay, let's get into it. This little tale starts with a couple of quotes, which I will, of course, read because they were quotes put in by Twain. And the first is from Benjamin Franklin. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And then a an alternative quote from George Washington, which is simply, I don't see it, which I think we can assume is in response to Franklin. And anyway, let's now proceed with the tale. Now, both of these are high authorities, very high and respectable authorities. But I am with General Washington first, last, and all the time on this proposition, because I don't see it either. I have tried getting up early, and I have tried getting up late, and the latter agrees with me best. As for a man's growing any wiser or any richer or any healthier by getting up early, I know it is not so, because I have got up early in the station house many and many a time and got poorer and poorer for the next half a day in consequence, instead of richer and richer. And sometimes on the same terms I have seen the sun rise 4 times a week up there at Virginia, and so far from my growing healthier on account of it, I got to looking blue and pulpy and swelled like a drowned man, and my relations grew alarmed and thought they were going to lose me. They entirely despaired of my recovery at one time, and began to grieve for me as one whose days were numbered, whose fate was sealed, who was soon to pass away from them forever, and from the glad sunshine and the birds and the odorous flowers and murmuring brooks and whispering winds and all the cheerful scenes of life, and go down into the dark and silent tomb. And they went forth sorrowing, and jumped a lot in the graveyard, and made up their minds to grin and bear it with that fortitude which is the true Christian's brightest ornament. You observe that I have put on a stronger test on the matter than even Benjamin Franklin contemplated, and yet it would not work. Therefore, how is a man to grow healthier, and wealthier and wiser by going to bed early and getting up early when he fails to accomplish these things even when he does not go to bed at all. And as far as becoming wiser is concerned, you might pull all the wisdom I acquired in these experiments in your eye without obstructing your vision any to speak of. As I said before, my voice is with George Washington's on this question. Another philosopher encourages the world to get up at sunrise because it is the early bird that catches the worm. It is a seductive proposition and well calculated to trap the unsuspecting. But its attractions are all wasted on me because I have no use for the worm. If I had, I would adopt the unreliable's plan. He was much interested in this quaint proverb and directed the powers of his great mind to its consideration for 3 or 4 consecutive hours. He was supposing a case. He was supposing, for instance, that he really wanted the worm, that the possession of the worm was actually necessary to his happiness, that he yearned for it and hankered after it, therefore, as much as a man could yearn for and hanker after a worm under such circumstances. And he was supposing further that he was opposed to getting up early in order to catch it, which was much of the more plausible of the two suppositions. Well, at the end of 3 or 4 hours' profound meditation upon the subject, the unreliable rose up and said, if he were so anxious about the worm and he couldn't get along without him, and he didn't want to get up early in the morning to catch him, why then, by George, he would just lay for him the night before. I never would have thought of that. I looked at the youth and said to myself, he is malicious and dishonest and unhandsome and does not smell good. Yet how quickly do these trivial demerits disappear in the shadow when the glare from this great intellect shines out above them. I have always heard that the only time in the day that a trip to the Cliff House could be thoroughly enjoyed was early in the morning, and I suppose it might be as well to withhold an adverse impression while the flow tide of public opinion continues to set in that direction. I tried it the other morning with Harry, the stockbroker, rising at 4 a.m. to delight in the following things described, to wit, a road unencumbered by carriages and free from wind and dust, a bracing atmosphere, the gorgeous spectacle of the sun in the dawn of his glory, the fresh perfume of flowers still damp with dew, a solitary drive on the beach while its smoothness was yet unmarred by wheel or hoof, and a vision of white sails glinting in the morning light far out at sea. These were the considerations, and they seemed worthy a sacrifice of 7 or 8 hours' sleep. We sat in the stable and yawned and gaped and stretched until the horse was hitched up and then drove out into the bracing atmosphere. When another early voyage is proposed to me, I want it understood that there is to be no bracing atmosphere in the program. I can worry along without it. In half an hour we were so thoroughly braced up with it that it was just a scratch that we were not frozen to death. Then the harness came unshipped or got broken or something, and I waxed colder and drowsier while Harry fixed it. I am not fastidious about clothes, but I am not used to wearing fragrant, sweaty horse blankets, and not partial to them either. I am not proud, though, when I am freezing, and I added the horse blanket to my overcoats and tried to wake up and feel warm and cheerful. It was useless, however. All my senses slumbered and continued to slumber, save the sense of smell. When my friend drove past suburban gardens and said the flowers never exhaled so sweet an odor before in his experience, I dreamily but honestly endeavored to think so too, but in my secret soul I was conscious that they only smelled like horse blankets. When another early voyage is proposed to me, I want it understood that there is to be no fresh perfume or flowers in the program either. I do not enjoy it. My senses are not attuned to the flavor. There is too much horse about it and not enough eau de cologne. The wind was cold and benumbing, and blew with such force that we could hardly make headway against it. It came straight from the ocean, and I think there are icebergs out there somewhere. True, there was not much dust, because the gale blew it all to Oregon in 2 minutes, and by good fortune it blew no gravel stones to speak of, only one of any consequence, I believe, a three-cornered one. It struck me in the eye. I have it there yet. However, it does not matter. For the future, I suppose I can manage to see tolerably well out of the other. Still, when another voyage is proposed to me, I want it understood that the dust is to be put in and the gravel left out of the program. I want my other eye if I continue to hang on until my time comes, and besides, I shall not mind the dust much hereafter, because I have only got to shut one eye now when it is around. No, the road was not encumbered by carriages. We had it all to ourselves. I suppose the reason was that most people do not like to enjoy themselves too much, and therefore they do not go out to the Cliff House in the cold and the fog and the dread silence and the solitude of 4 o'clock in the morning. They are right. The impressive solemnity of such a pleasure trip is only equaled by an excursion to Lone Mountain in a hearse. Whatever of advantage there may be in having that Cliff House road all to yourself we had, but to my mind a greater advantage would be in dividing it up in small sections among the entire community, because, in consequence of the repairs in progress on it just now, it's as rough as a corduroy bridge in a good many places, and consequently the less you have of it, the happier you are likely to be, and the less shaken up and disarranged on the inside. Wherefore, when another voyage is proposed to me, I want it understood that the road is not to be unencumbered with carriages, but just the reverse, so that the balance of the people shall be made to stand their share of the jolting and the desperate lonesomeness of the thing. From the moment we left the stable almost, the fog was so thick that we could scarcely see 50 yards behind or before or overhead, and for a while as we approached the Cliff House we could not see the horse at all, and were obliged to steer by his ears, which stood up dimly out of the dense white mist that enveloped him. But for those friendly beacons we must have been cast away and lost. I have no opinion of a 6 mile ride in the clouds, but if I ever have to take another, I want to leave the horse in the stable and go in a balloon. I shall prefer to go in the afternoon also when it is warm, so that I may gape and yawn and stretch if I am drowsy, without disarranging my horse blanket and letting in a blast of cold wind. We could scarcely see the sportive seals out on the rocks, writhing and squirming like exaggerated maggots, and there was nothing soothing in their discordant barking to a spirit so depressed as mine was. Harry took a cocktail at the Cliff House, but I scorned such ineffectual stimulus. I yearned for fire, and there was none there. They were about to make one, but the barkeeper looked altogether too cheerful for me. I could not bear his unnatural happiness in the midst of such a ghastly picture of fog and damp and frosty surf and dreary solitude. I could not bear the sacrilegious presence of a pleasant face at such a time. It was too much like sprightliness at a funeral, and we fled from it down the smooth and vacant beach. We had that all to ourselves, too, like the road, and I want it divided up also hereafter. We could not drive in the roaring surf and seemed to float abroad on the foamy sea as one is wont to do in the sunny afternoon, because the very thought of any of that icy looking water splashing on you was enough to congeal your blood almost. We saw no white winged ships sailing away on the billowy ocean, with the pearly light of morning descending upon them like a benediction, because the fog had the bulge on the pearly light, as the Unreliable observed when I mentioned it to him afterwards. And we saw not the sun and the dawn in his glory for the same reason. Hill and beach and sea and sun were all wrapped in a ghostly mantle of mist and hidden from our mortal vision. When another early voyage is proposed to me, I want it understood that the sun in his glory, and the morning light, and the ships at sea, and all that sort of thing are to be left out of the programme, so that when we fail to see them we shall not be so infernally disappointed. We were human icicles when we got to the ocean house, and there was no fire there either. I banished all hope then, and succumbed to despair. I went back on my religion, and sought surcease of sorrow in soothing blasphemy. I am sorry I did it now, but it was a great comfort to me then. We could have had breakfast at the ocean house, but we did not want it. Can statues of ice feel hunger? But we adjourned to a private room and ordered red hot coffee, and it was a sort of balm to my troubled mind to observe that the man who brought it was as cold and as silent and as solemn as the grave itself. His gravity was so impressive and so appropriate and becoming to the melancholy surroundings that it won upon me and thawed out some of the better instincts of my nature, and I told him he might ask a blessing if he thought it would lighten him up any, because he looked as if he wanted to very bad, but he only shook his head resignedly and sighed. That coffee did the business for us. It was made by a master artist, and it had not a fault, and the cream that came with it was so rich and thick that you could hardly have strained it through a wire fence. As the generous beverage flowed down our frigid throats, our blood grew warm again, our muscles relaxed, our torpid bodies awoke to life and feeling, anger and uncharitableness departed from us, and we were cheerful once more. We got good cigars also at the Ocean House and drove into town over a smooth road lighted by the sun and unclouded by fog. Near the Jewish cemeteries, we turned a corner too suddenly and got upset, but sustained no damage, although the horse did what he honestly could to kick the buggy out of the state while we were groveling in the sand. We went on down to the steamer, and while we were on board, the buggy was upset again by some outlaw and an axle broken. However, these little accidents and all the deviltry and misfortune that preceded them were only just and natural consequences of the absurd experiment of getting up at an hour in the morning when all God fearing Christians ought to be in bed. I consider that the man who leaves his pillow deliberately at sunrise is taking his life in his own hands, and he ought to feel proud if he don't have to put it down again at the coroner's office before dark. Now, for that early trip, I am not any healthier or any wealthier than I was before, and only wiser in that I know a good deal better than to go and do it again. And as for all those notable advantages, such as the sun and the dawn of his glory, and the ships, and the perfume of the flowers, etc., 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 I don't see them any more than myself and Washington see the soundness of Benjamin Franklin's attractive little poem. If you go to the Cliff House at any time after 7 in the morning, you cannot fail to enjoy it, but never start out there before daylight under the impression that you're going to have a pleasant time and come back insufferably healthier and wealthier and wiser than your betters on account of it. Because if you do, you will miss your calculation, and it will keep you swearing about it right straight along for a week to get even again. Put no trust in the benefits to accrue from early rising as set forth by the infatuated Franklin, but stake the last cent of your substance on the judgment of old George Washington, the father of his country, who said he couldn't see it. And you hear me endorsing that sentiment. And that was Mark Twain from 1864. A great little tale. Early rising as regards excursions to the Cliff House. You may have guessed already by my obvious enjoyment of that story that I am with Mark Twain, and I really struggle to see the benefits of forcing myself up very early in the morning. But with that, I thank you very much for watching and for listening.